You know, when a war kicks off, our minds usually jump straight to the front lines, right? The soldiers, the tanks, the conflict zone. But what happens when the shockwave from that war travels thousands of kilometers and slams into a country that has absolutely nothing to do with the fighting? Well, this is that story. It's about how a conflict in the Middle East brought an entire nation in Southeast Asia to its knees. So let's set the scene. The day is February 28th. The US and Israel launch Operation Epic Fury against Iran. Missiles start falling on the capital, Tehran, and just like that, the world attention is completely captured. And of course, everyone was glued to their screens. All eyes were on the conflict zone, the news was filled with bombings, diplomatic crises, and, you guessed it, that immediate spike in global oil prices. It seemed like a story we'd all seen before, but it really wasn't.
Because here's the thing, the real story, the one that tells us everything we need to know about modern conflict, wasn't actually happening there. It was unfolding thousands of kilometers away in a place most news cameras weren't even pointed.
See, for millions of people, this war didn't start with some big missile strike. Nope. It began quietly, in places like Quezon City, right at the gas pump and in the kitchen.
Let me introduce you to the people on the real front lines of this thing. You've got Romeo, who's been driving his jeepney for nearly 3 decades, and now he has to literally calculate if a day's work will even cover his fuel. Then there's Mike, a small food shop owner, who suddenly gets slammed with a 30% jump in the price of his cooking gas. And all over the country, hundreds of fuel stations are just empty, pumps closed. This is the immediate human cost of a distant war.
So you gotta ask, right? How did a country so incredibly far from the fighting become the first canary in the coal mine? This local problem was about to blow up into a full-blown national crisis. Okay, get this, March 25th. That's less than a month after those first missiles fell, and President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has to declare a national energy emergency. And remember, we're not talking about a neighboring country. We're talking about an island nation 6,000 kilometers away. That distance is everything. It's the first clue that this was never just a regional military operation. So what is it that makes the Philippines just so uniquely vulnerable? Well, the whole answer boils down to one single jaw-dropping number. Go on, take a guess. Yeah, 98%. Just let that sink in for a second. Almost all of the fuel that powers the entire country comes from the very region that's now in chaos. So you can see why the closure of the Strait of Hormuz on March 4th was catastrophic. For the Philippines, there was no plan B. There was no other supply chain to just switch over to. And man, things went south fast. At the start of the war, they had this little buffer, right? About 55 days of oil reserves. But look at this timeline. By March 20th, less than a month in, that was already down to 45. The Energy Secretary put it in the starkest terms imaginable. The worst case scenario is that this country runs dry. And this wasn't just some number on a spreadsheet. This was real pain, felt immediately by everyone. We're talking petrol prices jumping over 50%. And diesel, it nearly doubled in a single month. For the average person, this was a direct attack on their ability to make a living. But here's where the story gets bigger. The Philippines wasn't some isolated case. It was just the most obvious one. That shockwave was already moving, and believe me, the entire region was starting to shake.
Take Laos, for example, a country already struggling with debt. For them, the crisis hit the kids. The government had to cut the school week down to just 3 days to save fuel. Think about that, sacrificing education just to keep the lights on.
Then you jump over to an industrial giant like South Korea. For them, the problem wasn't filling up a car, it was about the very building blocks of our modern world. They were facing huge shortages of something called naphtha. Now, you might not know what that is, but it's essential for making the plastic that goes into, well, pretty much everything. Suddenly, the war in Tehran is threatening the global supply of Korean cars and washing machines. Across the entire region, people just stopped moving. In Vietnam, big airlines like Vietnam Airlines and VietJet had to slash their domestic flights by up to half. Same story in the Philippines, where Cebu Pacific did the same, and the president was even warning that all flights could be grounded, period. And the hits just kept on coming. Cambodia saw a mind-blowing 68% spike in fuel prices. Japan, one of the world's top economies, was forced into its biggest ever release of emergency oil reserves. And China, the world's factory, started hoarding its own fuel. It was a mad scramble. Everybody for themselves. Okay, so we've got a regional crisis that's spreading like wildfire across Asia. How does this snowball into a problem for the entire world? Well, as always, the answer is in the numbers. Just look at where all that oil from the Strait of Hormuz is supposed to go. A massive 80% of it is headed straight for Asia. We're talking about the world's biggest economies, right? China, India, Japan, South Korea. When you choke off their energy, their factories grind to a halt. And when their factories stop, the entire global supply chain seizes up. And this is the bottom line. The energy research firm Wood Mackenzie put it bluntly. If oil prices stay at an average of $125 a barrel for the year, it would trigger a global recession. Not a regional one, a global one. You know, this quote from Josh Kurlandzik at the Council on Foreign Relations just nails the impossible situation these countries are in. Sure, governments can try things, subsidies, conservation, but they're just temporary fixes, little band-aids on a massive wound. Like he says, you simply cannot afford to pay for your entire population's fuel indefinitely. There are no good options left. So, you see, all of this really forces you to rethink what a war even is in the 21st century. It's so much more than what's happening on some distant battlefield. So, you have the official story, the one you see on the news, right? A contained regional war about military moves and grand diplomacy. But the real story? That's about a global economic crisis. It's not about tanks, it's about the price of fuel and the cost of food. And it was never contained. It was always going to affect everyone, everywhere. This metaphor here just perfectly captures the helplessness of nations like the Philippines. They are, quote, passengers in a vehicle they did not choose to board, being driven somewhere they did not choose to go. Their entire national fate is being decided thousands of miles away in Washington, Tel Aviv, and Tehran. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that the whole idea of a distant war, it's pretty much an illusion now. In our interconnected world, the battlefield is the economy, and the front line, it's everywhere. It's at your gas pump, it's in your grocery store. The Philippines wasn't some strange exception. It was a warning that modern wars aren't just fought with missiles anymore. They're fought with supply chains. So the question isn't if this will happen again, it's who's next.